we record the whole an hour and a half or 2 hours, but we don't necessarily use all this beginning stuff. And so we'll do like we'll save like maybe half for Patreon bonus or whatever. So if you say anything that's more controversial, we'll probably save it for that.
So we'll save the demographics talk for the end.
The apartheid pill. We're gonna save that for the dedicated fans. It can't be for everybody.
So like the primary thing that I wanted to discuss.
Yeah, the meat of Slav's whole agenda for today.
Right. Real fans stay for the Slav talk.
Yeah, it's not very surprising.
The other thing to consider, right, is like.
So I'm at Slavoid T.
All right, this is Shit Spouter 37.
This is Black.com pilled.
This is the Fed Post.
Real fans stay for the Slav talk.
Yeah, it's not very surprising.
Yeah, I suppose you're right.
Yeah.
Well, and the other thing to consider, right, is like, and this is where I take a lot of issue when it comes either with like left-leaning people who want to like create their own version of how things should be, or even right-leaning people in reaction, like neo-reactionaries. My disagreement is like, okay, we put way too much emphasis on the domestic side of how this would operate, like how your future world would look like, how you want to attain power, what's your Machiavellian approach to like taking over the institutions. That's fantastic. That's great. What are you going to do about the fact that every other nation state on earth still exists and that stuff's not going to be on pause for you? This is why I kind of like try to take this like niche approach in like the circle of people that I hang out with. Is like I talk about like geopolitical analysis every Sunday on my channel. I do a show about it. We cover theory and various goings on in the world, because it's just like, to anyone who wants to, whoever is out there, whoever, even in the Fed Post audience who might be listening, the wonderful paying people on Patreon, if you guys are going to somehow become either like the next American Caesar, the next American Lenin, whatever you're going to be, you need to understand that like you still have to worry about China. You still have to like what the hell's going on in the Middle East? How are you going to interact with the UK? What's going on in Mexico? How's Canada going to respond? All these things need to be incorporated, and you need to understand what kind of foreign policy or what kind of geopolitical worldview are you going to hold as the leader of said country? Because let's face it, for the last, let's say 130 years, I would say, since like Teddy Roosevelt in the late 1890s, we've kind of had that liberal idealism of spreading the American, worldview. Started really with, Teddy. It gets amplified under Woodrow Wilson. We're going to make the world safe for democracy. FDR kicks it into fucking overdrive, where we pretty much let the Soviets have all of Eastern Europe because he's a little more sympathetic to them. And then during the Cold War, we become decolonialists. We sort of undermined the old European world order. And so, that's sort of a consequence of where we are now. So like the neoliberal, neoconservative argument, they're like, well, NATO's a security umbrella for Europe. Like they have their quality of life because they're not really paying for their military. We get to control shipping lanes. Things are great. And while we totally ignore domestically the last, like from 1980 to 2018, how China's become like the number one trading partner to the world compared to the US. So it's like, okay, you need to focus on the fact that there's still going to be an international community when you take over the United States or whatever you're going to do, reconstitute the country, let it collapse, balkanize, whatever. So to me, it's very important for anyone, left or right. Like you need to really put that into perspective when you start thinking about how the world operates, because that's not going to be on pause. The world is still going to be spinning.
Well, there's a lot of people like on the left that would be like, oh, we're just going to reach out to China and we're going to let them kind of just help us out and send solidarity over here.
Gee, please take us over.
Yeah. There's shit like that exists.
It's on the right too, where they'll be like, oh wow, China's way more based than us. And it's just like, guys, these people only care about the Han Chinese. They're not going to care about your lily white ass. Like you need to understand that they're going to be like, they're going to take you and Shaniqua, and they're going to put you both in the bauxite mines. Like you are not worth shit to these people.
Hey, maybe that's the only way that Shaniqua and I will ever have solidarity.
Right.
I mean,
in the Chinese camp.
There you go. You met your black GF in the Chinese work camp. You didn't just do it the old-fashioned way and go to a weave store.
Shit, maybe I do want Z to take over then.
Yeah, it sounds based actually.
Well, there's an article, I think from like Time or CNN, where they're like, China's taking all the recycled white guys and putting them to work. And it's like, well, if you decide to work for the CCP, I mean, they might make you like a manager of some like diamond or like cobalt mine in the middle of Africa. You never know. There's that YouTube video about the top 10 countries to meet an African wife. Man, it all works out for you.
I actually two of my good friends literally did one of those like weekends in China where they like send you off to be like the white businessman that just sits silently and nods at business meetings.
Nice.
I know a couple dudes that like literally did that, and they're like, yeah, like we just like nodded along to shit and like got wasted, and like I guess like the I love this story so much I'm like tripping over myself telling it. Like they just got fucking wasted, and like the mayor of the town showed up, and like they didn't even know what the fuck the business deal was even about or anything, but like yeah, like they just pay you, they like put you up for a weekend, and you're just like the white dude for like a status symbol.
Yeah.
Damn.
So,
They probably just okayed like child labor and like cobalt mines or something crazy.
oh yeah,
And they
no,
have
yeah.
that in Japan too, where they have like boyfriend cafes where they'll like try to get like white guys to come over, and it's basically like the inverse of Hooters. It's like, all right, Japanese women, here are these like white guys that you can Google at while they serve you tea.
Wow. Objectified. Yeah, I mean that's crazy. That's such a crazy job. I would do that job. I just imagine they're like talking, translating, and all of a sudden there's a serious moment, and they all look over at those guys and they just nod. Okay, like that's the assurance. Like this fucking crazy. Do you know how much they got paid?
Probably plenty.
I don't know. Like, I think it was like to be honest, I don't know if it was like anything like fucking insane, but I'll report back because I actually know that they like listen to the fucking show. And so,
Shit.
Nice.
Yeah, so
shout out.
Yeah, shout out to them.
you.
But yeah, I'll get a reminder. I'm sure it wasn't anything like insane, but I think like it was like nothing to sneeze at.
Yeah.
Any pay for that is good. Is good pay.
The Chinese yuan is very strong right now.
Yeah, well, and I guess it was a lot of free food and free drinks. So you know,
I'm sure
And
women
Nubian-
were involved.
Yeah, government issued Nubian Queen and all that.
Damn, how do I sign
they
up
all
for
want.
this shit, bro?
No, but I'm Prudentialist. I'm glad that you say that about China, because there's something that really infuriates me about the right towards that like China. There's something like from the left towards I expect it. You know what I mean? Like I'm just like, yeah, of course, whatever. You think they're communists, so yeah, of course. You're LARPing as a communist, and they're LARPing as a communist. You guys are made for each other. But yeah, the right towards that do it. That shit just irks the shit out of me. It's
It irks me as someone
contrarian.
who studied international relations. It's just like, why would you do this? To me, any person on the left or right, and the right, I think more so than the left, because I think the left kind of fundamentally gets that like there's differences in culture and people just because they've got their own weird obsession with how those things get categorized. But like the right needs to understand, like there's a book written in the late 90s called The Clash of Civilizations by Samuel P. Huntington. And he pretty much outlines that the world is not divided. I mean, the world is divided by nation states and people, sure, but there's large portions of the world that are sort of divided in categories. Like you have the Han Chinese, you have in the world of Islam, you have the West, which is, you know, the liberal world order in which we've created, and you've got Russia, and you've got the African continent, which of course is divided in various areas depending on religion. And so they're fundamentally different, and they have fundamentally different worldviews. They have fundamentally different ideologies. They're going to look at the world and how the world should interact with one another differently. So you're asking, you know, an ethnocentric people with a history of roughly 5,000 years of conquering any opposition to their sort of like racial hegemony that mandates their empire and their sort of mandate of heaven, that have a chip on their shoulder after what they call it a century of humiliation. You want those people to fucking rule over your Anglo ass? Like, what are you talking about? And it just irks the hell out of me. It's like you people have no understanding that they're not going to be your friends. You're probably going to work in a camp. You're not going to keep your job in the same way that the LARPing tanky is not going to be able to stay in neat when the communist revolution happens, because you're either going to face the wall or work in the fucking camps. It's not ever going to be the way that you plan it out.
I keep going back to this Obama documentary of like this Chinese factory that's set up. It's like a rural town in America or whatever, but like all the like right toward not right toward, but like these just regular guys, just regular like probably right leaning center people, just sort of like kind of like enamored by like the collectivism of China, because there's no collectivism here because it's all like atomized and isolated, and they just like they long for it or whatever. And like the CEO coming through and being like, oh yeah, like don't put up any Chinese stuff, put up American stuff in the factories. Like they like that, like just make them happy, whatever makes them happy. And then saying stuff like, yeah, these Americans are really lazy. We work our people like twice as hard for half the pay. They need to get on that mentality. So it's like that's what's coming.
Of neoliberalism. We're the ones that are the cheap labor.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's what's coming. So it's just weird to me to think of that as like, oh, these guys are actually going to care about us, and they're just like laughing to themselves. It's like, yeah, these stupid Yankees, like just put up their fucking Elvis poster or whatever makes them happy, and then put them in the mine or whatever. Like it's just funny. Like that's what all the good. It's
like the thing about like ideological consistency, where like the latest dissident take on the right or whatever. And this is just, I'm generalizing at this point, where they're like, well, maybe Islam and like having a relationship with Islam is going to be the way that we own the libs, or like or how the mainstream GOP is like, well, maybe if we let trannies into the party, that'll show them that we're not bigots. And then that Stone Toss comment comes up again, where it's just like Democrats are the real racists, and then like 5 years later, it's like neo-Leninists are the real transphobes. Like that's where we're at, and it's just so frustrating. And so it's just like, yep, put the meme in. Cthulhu always swims to the left. That's where we're at.
Yeah. I mean, the GOP is I don't understand anybody that sees any hope in them.
Boomers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a pretty hard line to it's a pretty revealing tell if you really have faith in them. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. So this sort of like this goes to like this other thing I've been thinking about, and like this kind of relates to the South Africa thing. But like there's this argument that like. What was that memo that Bezos had out where he's like, oh, we want to increase diversity because it
decreases unionization,
right? Stifles, solidarity or whatever. And I remember asking about that. Like I hadn't really thought about it. I'd only heard it from like right-leaning people. So I was just like asking about it, or whatever. And I like a bunch of like right-leaning people respond or whatever. But it was interesting. I still have to like, think about it some more. I mean, it's not something I've really thought a lot about, but like Bog had some interesting thing that he said that like always sticks out with me is like, it's not really about like racial collectivism. It's more national identity that should be the tethering, because we're in a weird situation. I mean, this is an old point, but it's like we're in a weird situation because America is so.
Yeah, it sounds like something that Mussolini said. Actually, I recall.
yeah.
Something about race is just like ooey gooey nothingness because there's no real races anymore, and so national identity is the only path forward. Straight out of the book, bro.
Hey, shout out to him because that's
base third position is fascist out of Italy.
It's kind of true. It's kind of true because races, it really is just so.
National identity is also a cope.
Okay,
I disagree there. But,
well, I mean, so this is where like so earlier in my like political lifetime, because I was raised as a military kid. Like I have a very living memory of 9/11. I have this like weird nostalgic, but I really hate him for George W. Bush. But like there was a weird sense of civic nationalism I used to hold on to in like high school and college. And like looking back now, I'm like, it can't fucking happen. The reason why I have a problem with the argument for like we'll renew the national identity. Okay, how are you going to do that? We have two vastly different narratives, and this is where like Moldbug will talk about the concept of like the two-story state. Because the original like single story that the United States was founded on is that you had European settlers come to the country, created something from nothing, created a country, dominated its neighbors, and created the United States. Like when we have this idea of negative rights, liberty, freedom, a constitution, all that jazz. And now, as Christopher Caldwell points out, the civil rights era from 1965 is the new genesis of the country. Juneteenth is like the new national independence day. We have a black national anthem. So which one's it going to be? Especially as we become increasingly more multi-ethnic and more diverse, and there's like not really a majority anymore. So like, how are you going to govern? How are you going to maintain a strong national identity? Because you've got two competing stories. One is being considered racist. You're tossing out statues. You're tossing out, literature. There's no way that you can fundamentally create a national identity when these two things are at war.
Well, there are a lot of like right-leaning or conservative minorities or recent immigrants. That's the big thing. I mean, there's a lot of Hispanic people and recent immigrants that voted for Trump.
Yeah, I mean, the Rio Grande Valley in Texas especially, it's where we got that multiracial whiteness article from the Washington Post.
Right.
Oh, yeah. The Cubans aren't Latinx.
Right.
Oh God.
I think national identity. Look, I have no patriotism. Like I don't have a single patriotic bone in my body. I don't really care about that shit. But in terms of it, like Slav had said before, like, you know, in terms of it being a medium to something, or like a means to something, that makes perfect sense. I mean, I think there is grounds for that. I think there is grounds for like people of different ethnicities, sort of like that already does exist. I mean, I don't even look.
It does, but the thing is that it's not something that is actively endorsed or like participatory anymore. Like, is someone who grew up in a very patriotic, like, duty to country, I believe in the history, I have this like strong love for the Constitution, and like I used to get really emotional, and I realized like how far we have fallen from like actually enforcing that document. Like, that's how much of like this like raw America fuck yeah attitude I once had. And so the only people, like, I lived in El Paso, Texas, like for a very long time. The only people that were like really happy and excited for people to become naturalized citizens was like the really tiny number of people who were registered Republicans and would go down and dress as Uncle Sam and pass them pocket constitutions and little American flags. I would love for the national identity to be the dominant thing, because America is a really awesome place. It has a really great history. It has a really great, you know, beautiful landscapes and people. And if you were to talk to any average Joe, regardless of race, ethnicity, or gender, and just sit down at a diner and have a cup of coffee with them, you would probably get along just fine. The problem is that you have a governing elite that doesn't want that to happen. We know that there are multiple studies in political science that will tell you that the more diverse an area is, the less civic participation goes down, the less voting happens, the less likely you are to go to like PTA meetings or even city hall meetings. And so those people in power can kind of just run roughshod over these communities. And it's very hard to organize because they're still looking at things through like a racial, ethnic lens. And I don't think that, especially in this environment, this is where, and I'm still thinking about it too, right? Like, this isn't like a fully formed thought, but like I get a little pessimistic, because it's just like, I would love for this new rebirth or reconstituted national identity to be formed in a way where you and I can just get the fuck along, and we can really focus our problems at the assholes on like DC or at the head of Amazon, you know, where no rational country would ever have these people have that much power over you and I. But I don't know how we get there. And I'm a little concerned because we don't have a way to get there yet, or at least I don't think it's been fully fleshed out. And then secondly, they will throw everything they can to prevent that from happening. And I think, as the recent riots have shown on, like, you know, or even things on like January 6th, even the Democratic riots to like, we're going to hold Biden accountable. And then Biden is the same shit lib neoliberal kind of policies that they would have gotten from Hillary or Obama. I just don't know how we get there. And that's where I'm a little bit concerned about this, because they've done such a good job at instituting, you know, these new narratives, these new blood libels, these new stories, these new histories, where even the other day they were talking about like how, you know, lynchings are still happening when there hasn't been really a recorded or reported one in decades. So it's just like, how do we overcome all of this animus that's coming from the top in order to have that identity? And that's where I've got my thoughts and concerns.
You know what, this makes me think, I start to think like, you know, it depends maybe what your political leaning is or your political origins are that maybe shape what you think the majority think. In my mind, the majority of the country, maybe because I have left lib origins, the majority of the country is right leaning in social values. So that's how I view it, right? But I feel like when I talk to a lot of, what do you consider
right leaning? I feel like
that's a good question. Let's dive into that.
Right leaning, social values, traditionalism, marriage should be between man and woman. You know, all the good stuff. The family's important.
It is good stuff. Thank you.
I don't think that most of the working class think that marriage should be between a man and a woman specifically. I think that's
I would think most of the working class would probably have an issue if a certain loud vocal minority started, you know, being all about them making their minority status their sole portion of their identity. And the other thing, right, is like there's a lovely study that came out where it's just like alcohol makes people racist. And it's like, no, their niceties just go away because their inhibitions are down and then the truth can come out.
Well, yeah. I mean, I just noticed that when I talk to right-leaning people, I get the impression that the left social woke thing is very popular, which, you know, I have an issue with that, because I don't really like this idea of there's these two narratives and they have equal weight or whatever, and the country's split on it. I don't really know. I don't really get that feeling though, because
if I could explain,
I feel like they have amplification. I feel like they have elite amplification.
That's what I would agree with you, is that there's amplification from the top. And you're right. Like if we go on like Rotten Tomatoes right now, there's going to be like some real big differences between very woke forced shit on like Netflix compared to what the audience actually thinks. And from there, I would agree with you, right? But the issue is that when you've got such force coming from the top and you have this entire institutionalized, apparatus to like facilitate and stir shit up, it does make it difficult to view things in a way where you're coming from. And the other thing that I would say, right, is that, okay, traditionally things are, in your position or your view, are mainly right-leaning, right, on a majority of the country. I mean, if that were the case, I mean, do you think that the right socially might have had some victories in the last 25 years or so that are worth noting? Because I don't think that we've really had any that really stand out from my perspective.
I don't think that like the working class has a lot to say culturally at all. I think it has a lot to do with top down strong army and coercion.
Well, because they're as far as you can get from the means of cultural production.
Yeah, exactly.
Entirely.
So it doesn't matter at all what those people mostly think as far as if there would be victories on the right or not.
I will grant like as far as like electoral politics and everything goes, like I can see what you're saying about like you would think that they would have some wins.
Well, they just rig that shit, dude.
Well, not.
Well, and that's why 16 I think is so important, right? Because because you had a huge and not huge, but I would say statistically significant turnover of like Bernie voters in the primaries to Trump in 16. A lot of the issues that Bernie and Trump campaigned on were very similar from just vastly different approaches. You had sort of the progressive left view from Bernie, and you had sort of this like nationalist, like revivalist viewpoint from Trump. And a lot of them, I think, were just pissed off because Bernie got obviously that thing stolen from him in 16. And I would say stolen again in 20 as well. Like, so they voted for him. Right. Mm-hmm. And so this is the first time I think in the last like 100 years, the American people actually had a say in their elections. Because democracy, in my opinion, is very much like a laundered oligarchy, especially when you start making power really hard to hold accountable. And we do that all the time with bureaucracy. And so the American people actually had a say, and it was primarily based. And what was the conversation about the 2016 election? The white working class, the working class vote, the working class like union vote that traditionally votes down. And so they finally had a say in their election. And of course, like I mentioned earlier, like the people at the top realized that their thumb on the scale was not as pressed as hard as it should be.
Right.
And and I think that it's a huge chunk as to where we are today is because like we can't let actual working class people, regardless of their party affiliation, their racial identity, kind of like throw this brick at the the glass walls of the system. Because I mean, you're right when you mentioned it earlier about like certain minorities voting for Trump. Like the Rio Grande Valley in Texas is traditionally Democrat, but it swung for Trump in percentages that have never been seen before in that area in years. The same thing for like a lot of Cubans in Florida. It's the main reason why he carried it. I mean, there was just a huge swing in like places like Arizona and Nevada and even California, even though he didn't win those states. So yeah, like I would agree with you that it's at the top, but I mean, the fact is that we know how manufacturing consent works. We know how media disseminates, which can change perspectives. That's why like a lot of anti-gay attitudes start disappearing in the late 90s, early aughts with like shows like Will and Grace. There's just, I think that until we can kind of overcome that sort of hypnotic power that they have, it's going to be very hard to create that coalition.
Well, and I think...
I was just going to say, like, Will and Grace and, like, the media stuff. Like, I feel like, there's media stuff that they control. And, people will be like, oh, I can't say anti-gay stuff because that's not PC and I might get fired. But in private conversations, people still hold the same views as always. Like that shit doesn't get rewired in like a generation. Like,
oh no,
I don't believe
but
that.
That's the thing about like woke capital, right? Is that like we can disagree with it all they want. I don't think it's ever been about like the generation that is like the current consumer. It's about the next consumer. I did a video on this a while back about like woke capital, and my example was like Little Caesars, ironically of all places. And the whole shtick that Little Caesars ran with like this advertising season was like big pizza. And I say that in quotations, like this decrepit or like ugly, evil, lair, cartoony, villainy boardroom of just like pizza being so expensive. And they're like, Little Caesars got a $5 hot and ready and everything's going to be great. And it's just like, we're not big pizza. We're Little Caesars. We're the little guy going up against, the big guys. It had a very Occupy Wall Street feel. And I'm thinking to myself, this isn't meant for you and me. This is not meant. It's meant for the next generation of consumers because, like, woke, go broke. To me, I think is very much a cope. Like, you can call for boycotts, you can call for them to like put a book back on the list or whatever, but the companies are still going to do it, right? Like they're still going to put out their shitty woke advertising. We're still going to have gender swapped movie remakes.
Of course.
We're still
going
to.
You're going to choke it down. You're going to like it.
Well, and they're going to shove it down our throats. But most importantly, it's going to be for their kids. And that's why they keep going for younger and younger and younger audiences, because all that you have to do is program the next generation to be like, oh my gosh, you know, they did the thing. They did the virtue signal and I'll buy their product. And that's how it operates. And to me, that's like the most disturbing shit ever.
No, that's a goddamn fact, dude. That's what I'm saying when I see all these goddamn kid books and they're all pushing that fucking agenda and shit. And I'm sitting there, I didn't read none of that bullshit in school. I'm like, where the fuck are the hits? Where are the classics, dude?
Where's the hungry caterpillar, damn it?
Yeah, where's corduroy in this bitch? What, like, you know what I'm saying? Why is no one reading Catcher in the Rye anymore? Like, motherfuckers
no one's
are out
reading
here.
Lord of the Flies.
Yeah. They're reading like Identity, A Tale of a Transgender Youth and shit like that. Like, I'm telling you, this shit is sick. I don't know.
You work in like in a place with
with children's books. Yeah, I worked at like a place that was kind of like doing it's essentially a big ass warehouse with mad kids books in it.
Gotcha.
And so I'm going around just seeing like what, and they all go to schools like K-12, K through 12 schools and public libraries and stuff like that all across the nation.
That's depressing.
Yeah, and
Can you imagine? I don't know if you guys had this as a kid, but like, you remember like the Scholastic in school like book sales that they would have, and how awesome that was for like that week as a kid. Can you imagine how like terrifying it must be to be like a second grader to walk in on one of those, and then it's all like just tranny shit all over the place?
It's all female reboots of Captain Underpants now.
Oh gosh,
I'd be pissed, dude.
Captain Two Piece or whatever.
Yeah, I don't think that like quote unquote their average person or the quote unquote the working class or your normie quote unquote believes any of this shit by and large. I don't think that they believe quote unquote left cultural or quote unquote right cultural views. I think that trying to put them on that type of spectrum is redundant, and I think that it's part of the problem that's led us to here, to where we have these defunct fucking dichotomy of things that aren't actually helpful for us, that don't actually represent what anyone actually believes. I don't think that most people in the working class hold anti-gay views or think that they should that there should only be a marriage between a man and a woman. But I do think most people in the working class
there are a lot of Hispanics who would have
no, but I think most people in the working class look at like all of this amplification and all that and are like, yo, what the fuck? That's not fucking for me. Like, none of this shit's for me, but you can do whatever you want to do. I'm worried about going to work, putting food on the table. I think a lot of people's cultural views are pretty ephemeral, and I think a lot of the time they can change depending on who they're talking to, and that's part of that hyper reality signaling thing that we mentioned, where you're signaling in group and out group. And when it's something that's that flimsy and that much of a just purely symbolic thing, it can't be something that's like a main driving force for people. And it's not something that can be charted as, oh, this person believes strictly right-leaning views. Because you'll find people that are like anti-abortion or whatever, but then they knock up a broad and they are like, oh, you need to get an abortion. Shit like that happens all the time. Like, I think when it comes down to material circumstances, people's shit will change as far as social goes to a degree. Not everyone.
For
sure, but that's the point of that's the point of them being working class and being in precarious situations. Because I got cooked for this, but people in precarious situations are going to have right social values because it's survival.
But it's not right social fucking values, dude. Like,
well, I think, okay, so maybe to like mediate here, I think you're right to the point where like a lot of our material perspective like does determine a lot for like political views, or like we just want to grill or we just want to play video games or whatever. And also I think the other disconnect that we have, right, is like we're all online, we're all commentators, like we all self-commodify ourselves, we're all this brand with like the latest like either hot take or shit take where we're trying to like, you know, gain our followers or get more money on Patreon or whatever. Not to say that the grift shouldn't be respected. I mean, that's the Sigma mindset, but at the same time, right, like that definitely fucks over our ability to analyze things correctly, because like there'll be times where I'm thinking about, well, like how do we accomplish this? And it's like, sit back a second, like put yourself back in the real shoes, act like you're a normie at work at your office, and how would they interact? Right. So you do have a point. But the second thing, right, is that like I think that a lot of people, and this is where I kind of like the order or the entropy extropy dynamic of what like neo-reactionaries will call like right wing or left wing. Because I think that a lot of like normal like working class people, they just want like order. They just want, you know, things to, they want the, you know, the lights to work in their house. They want the roads to be fine. They want the potholes fixed. They want to walk in their communities and neighborhoods without anything bothering them. Basic orderly things that we would expect in a civilized society. Mm-hmm. And then unfortunately you have a very like we have this entropic force at the top that doesn't want that to happen, and will make it harder and harder for you to like talk to your neighbor or to facilitate a conversation with like, you know, your coworker about X, Y, and Z in public. And so it makes it very hard. And that goes back to our Amazon conversation, right? Like we got to make it harder to unionize. We got to make it harder for you to have a conversation. We have to make it harder for your, you know, community to engage in like basic civics. And it's so atomizing. And I think that that's also a part of the disconnect when we look at our, you know, either like working class or, you know, white collar, you know, politics, is that, you know, these people want to, they want things immediately for themselves, like survival, like CRK was saying. But like at the same time, you've got also the issue that they want that. And then at the same time, they want things to, you know, go the way that they might want it politically at the ballot box or whatever. But it's hard to even accomplish that when we are, you know, we have to focus on the material. You have to also focus on the fact that there are things out of their control that doesn't allow them to organize and fix it.
I agree that what you're saying about they want order. I agree with that. I think a form of order is people around you looking like you, believing what you believe, having your religion, sharing your identity.
Yep.
That's part of the order thing, right? I mean, it's a weird thing I agree with the Wignats about, but like,
no, that's the one thing they get right. And then they'll say things like no more brother wars, and then totally ignoring all of European history where everyone was killing each other. Right, look at Balkan Twitter if you want an example of like white racism against each other. Right.
Like, yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't agree with their solution or whatever, but I mean, their assessment of like human nature, I think is true. I think that, and I mean, I don't know if COH or someone doesn't consider that right, or I don't know, whatever, but like in my mind, that's a right-leaning social value, and like, but whatever, it's not really the point. The point more is like, is it impossible? I think that's the question that comes to my mind, is we're locked with this mixed up, you know, heterogeneous like population. We're stuck with this,
yep.
Right, for the foreseeable future, right? The Wignat solution or the separatists, the black separatists, that shit is not happening. You're not going back to, you know, Africa, Marcus Garvey. That's not happening. It's too late. We're stuck like this. So thinking like constructively. Mm-hmm. Like what is the means to, because from what I'm getting from what you're saying, you're sort of black pilled on the national identity route, and you have some skepticism.
I want one so bad. I want one so bad because but at the same time, I don't think either like what we call like left wing or right wing. I don't think either of us, you know, politically, and I'm saying that very broadly, and by all means, correct me if you think I'm wrong, but like I don't think we have yet that solution to forging a political formula or a narrative or a mythos where we can come together at the table and, you know, you're like, you're Mexican, you're Asian, you're white, whatever. Like, we're Americans at this table, and this is what we all believe in. These are a common set of values. Like, there was a time where, like, you know, there was a set of values that people believed in when it came to like the American flag or the Pledge of Allegiance that was kind of like instilled in you as a kid. And I mean, even now, like I'm 25, and like I pass by on my way to work this giant American flag that waves in front of a car dealership, and it just, I get this mixed feeling because I want to love it, and I want to have that sense of patriotism and pride that I grew up with as a kid and as an Army brat. But like, I also think about like what we represent culturally abroad, and I mean, I've lived abroad, and I definitely know what, you know, Germans and other people have to say about us. And I look at what we've done, and I look at what the last 20 years have been about, and with like the wars, and it's just like, you know, you get demoralized, and that it really breaks my heart. And so it's just like, I really want that American Renaissance to come back, where like, and as someone on Twitter said, you know, like, you know, we may just transition sort of from empire to empire, from like the Umayyads and ancient Islam to the Abbasids, and that might be the way that it happens. But I really want to know how we get there, and and that's what I've been doing. I've been doing a lot of reading. I've been reading like Baido's Metapolitics. I've been reading a lot of Spengler. I've been reading a lot of Pareto, and I'm just trying to understand, like, well, how can we create a formula that gets us there? Because I would love that more than collapse, balkanization, civil unrest, civil conflict, because I don't want any of those things. I value human life. I hate accelerationism because as a Christian, you don't want to immanentize the eschaton. You don't want to bring about the rapture early. Doing that is sinful. You're going to land yourself in hell. Like, that's why I'm like very anti-accelerationist. Like, that's only going to cause more problems. And I've been ranting and raving for way too long now. So by all means, just shut me up.
I just, you know, none of us are going to have the answer to this. Obviously,
no, I know.
This is the grand question.
That's the $1 million question that I want. Yeah. I would love to work with more left-leaning people in the future to try and come up with a solution. But I think it has to be a post-liberal one.
Right.
Because clearly we've got a problem with where we're at being too hyper-individualized and atomized, because that's way too easy for people at the top to exploit. And I think that's very clear to see.
Yeah, we're in a very unique position, and there's not too many like historical, references we could look to see how we deal with this. But I'm open to like the national identity route. I mean, if there is more like protectionism, like what you're talking about, or like our imperialism, like kind of ruining our image, or people not thinking enough about foreign policy, like turning inwardly and like protectionist mindset. I don't know if that would satisfy what you're talking about too, but like in my mind, that would be better foreign policy. That would be there'd be a way to satisfy all those things. You could have you could not be repulsed by your own country because of all the sick shit we do everywhere else. Because then because we'd be withdrawing and we'd be taking care of our own people. So I'm open to that.
It's like that, like back here, like when the war was just beginning to start in Iraq. I don't know if any of y'all, I don't know y'all's ages, but I would assume that we're kind of roughly within the same age range. But you remember like that saying where it was just like, if America looked at America the way it looks at Iraq, it would invade it and, build schools, fix its roads and fix its government. I still firmly believe that because it's just like, okay, like that's what needs to happen. And no, I agree with where you're coming from. I think that clearly, like the whole, and this is where I get skeptical of like the free traders, because it's just like, okay, we've deindustrialized ourselves. We have killed a good chunk of the American working class. We have made it virtually impossible to project power abroad because we're now completely dependent upon other people to build the shit that we need. Like, how on earth do you run a country that way when you're entirely like your entire economy is operated upon like mindless hedonistic consumerism and, fiat currency and credit and usury? Like, where the hell are you going to what kind of image does that present to both the world, but also to yourself? I think that if a solution is going to be created, I think that when we talk about like whether it's like the working class or even just your Joe Normie who works a white collar job at like a tax prepper's office or whatever, or even someone like me, I manage finance where I work, and I'm a middle class guy with my income. So it's just like, if you were to get those people together, right, a majority of them, want to be left alone. They want to have a good government. They have no desire to lead. They don't want to be Caesar. They would rather keep things, safe and secure. They want their supply lines. They want their food on the table. They want their money in their bank accounts to pay their bills. Whoever can channel that sort of low energy politics, that's the way forward, because we're not the same people from like 1949, right, that did the Battle of Athens in Georgia and like took on a corrupt government with guns. We're not those guys. People will LARP like that, and they will be spicy and edgy, I think, for money or for clicks or whatever. But I mean, they're either feds or they're soon to be arrested, and those are not the people to associate with.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the answer is boring economic populism, sort of like, keeping it down to like the simple
class-based analysis.
Yeah, common denominator shit. Like I think that's really, exactly. If someone can come around and channel that and just not do any weirdo woke shit, and maybe like just not overdo it with like, like I don't know what people would consider like bigoted or whatever, like not making it a forefront thing, like maybe some degrees of it or whatever, but like not making it a prominent thing. I think that would work. I think that's what people were hoping Trump was, which he wasn't.
No, he was as establishment as they come. I think once we kind of saw who his picks were for the cabinet and what he did. I mean, the few things that Trump did right, I think, was sort of recognizing the geopolitical threat in China, trying to de-escalate the situation in North Korea, trying to reorient and reindustrialize. Like, those are grand things. Those are great. And then you fucked up everything else because you didn't clean house. You didn't change your civil service. You didn't change your bureaucracy. The closest that ever happened was like when Rex Tillerson was the Secretary of State, and he just told the State Department, all right, like, fuck off. I'm not filling up any positions. Like, we're way too bloated as it is. But
right, like, he was never serious about like.
Oh no.
He was just a thorn in their side.
Exactly, and I think the fact that he didn't recognize, he didn't recognize what he was up against, because he's like, oh, I'm Donald Trump. Everybody loves me. Like, it's fine. and then like letting the people who like knew how to game him and like kiss his ass. And he's like, oh, these people are great, and then watch them stab him in the back the next day.
Right.
I mean, it was piss poor politics. But I mean, this is where the spicy question I'll ask you guys is that, okay, so say we have like a class oriented economic populism where it's not woke shit. Do you keep the same form of democracy that we have, or do you change it?
You change it.
Oh, all right. Well, how are we changing it? What would you change?
Oh, man. I mean, there's a whole fucking list of things. But first of all, you start to take out money from politics one way or another. I don't have like a list of exactly the channels that lobbyists and like corporate interests go through to tell you step by step what to do. But I mean, like some basic talking points. I can repeat some Bernie bullshit, like take out super PACs, right? End Citizens United,
sure.
you know, change the way that.
Well, that's not changing our democracy. That's not changing like the structure of our.
Oh, well, at the very least, you'd have to do stuff like that. And then, like, as far as I would like to see, like, we would change the structure of our democracy as far as who can vote, being producers, people being laborers, people in the working class. But that's obviously not something that's going to be, like, very heartily supported by most people, you know, so.
Yeah. I think for me, I think like the romantic answer that I want to be able to say would be something like Muammar Gaddafi's like third universal theory, where it's just like everything is just run by these like committees at every fucking level of society, and everybody basically works two jobs of the job they work and then actually just running the country, going to all these fucking meetings. That obviously, as you're reading Green Book, is like a complete fucking joke, and you're like, this is insanity. So more, but I would, you know, if something that could
I get
work,
what you mean.
I like that. More realistically, more realistically, a benevolent dictator and kind of consolidating with I genuinely do believe that while trying to balance while trying to spread out as much ownership amongst people as possible. But I think the key is also going to be, boom, right there, you're hitting localism. I think the key is also going to be with this model. You're not going to want to get too big. But I don't know. I mean, this is where, I mean, right there, I mean, just like there's tons of problems with the scale question to begin with. So I don't really know. I mean, I just mentioned monarchism and absolute pure democracy. So like, I think it's probably pretty clear. I have absolutely no coherent solution.
I'm pretty any means pilled, basically. But like, I would specifically like in my ideal world, like workers' councils and an interconnected, you know, like community of workers' councils at small local levels that then defer at regional levels. And out from there.
I mean, I think at least for like the United States, right? Like, I think you need to keep sort of the federated system, because the idea that you're going to have like a unitary form of government control everything, I think is going to be an issue. Because it's like, how do you govern a nation of like 330 million people, or plus or minus whatever, and effectively manage that from one place on the house on the hill to Washington, D.C. I think it's pretty clear that doesn't work, especially when you've got things like gerrymandering. You've got things like the fact that the American people have no political recourse. The one base thing that Ben Sasse has ever said, despite the fact he's a Republican from Nebraska, is that he said this during like the Kavanaugh confirmation hearings. So like, the American people can't go to their congressman to like get their problem solved. They can't call the White House and get their problem solved. So whenever Americans have politics, where do they go to? They go to the courts. And the Supreme Court becomes the epicenter of all American politics, and at least it has been for like the last 50 years since Roe v. Wade. And so that's the only place that they have recourse. That's why the court has become so important, despite the fact it's supposed to be quote unquote independent, right? I think that you need to have some kind of system akin to the early Roman Empire, where you did have sort of a Caesarian type figure, but at the same time you had the Roman Senate that still had control over things like administration, finance, your basic run the country type deals, that at least here in the United States, they would be, selected by state assemblies, where the citizens who are net taxpayers or net producers for the country. So like workers, people that actually, pay a net increase on their taxes, and most importantly have families, because you have to contribute to the next generation of, the same people who would then select said councils to like represent their interests the same way that the state legislatures in the United States before the 17th Amendment, got rid of that. But I mean, I'm working on this as like a video series. It's going to be like 4 parts about how we need to, like, America, I don't think needs to collapse. It needs to be reconstituted. How do we incorporate material problems with a spiritual? Here's my proposed solution, and here's how it would work both domestically and foreign. That's what I'm working on. I don't have like the whole concrete details yet. I'm working with like 3 people with like PhDs in history to like kind of like draft this with me. So
nice.
That's something I'm working on. But like, nice. I think clearly we've made it so hard to hold our system of government accountable what's the point of having a congressman? Like Colin Quinn, the comedian, had a really great stand-up bit, I think in 2015, called Unconstitutional, where it's like, in America, you have three classes of people. You have the really rich people that can meet with their senator and have their problem. You've got the middle class people that will call their congressman and just be on hold with their secretary for like 45 minutes. And then you've got the lower working class that just yells at their TV or radio. Yeah. And that's, to me, I feel like that is the perfect way to describe how like the American political system works for like the average voter, because that's definitely a really great material way to look at it. But at the same time, right, like we as a society also, you need to balance like the material and the spiritual. If you focus way too much on the material, I think that a lot of the problems that we see today kind of become a problem, because like we have those, children's books. We've made the idea of having children an optional choice that's often seen with negative consequences rather than an obligation to family, society, faith, and so on. I think that secular, like all governments and all forms of like any kind of government, whether it's democracy or republic, monarchy or whatever, they're all theocratic states. They all have a governing religion. The United States used to have this secular religion about like the mythos of the American founding fathers and all that jazz, and now it's definitely this kind of artificially enforced, amplified woke shit that is that we all kind of hate, and that's sort of the new religion, where it's okay for like young people to go to college, get like septum piercings, and just be like, yeah, fuck everything. Like, I want to just focus on myself. I want to just smoke a bowl and not ever think about anything else in my life. To me, that's concerning, because it's just like, well, then what are you doing with your life, man? Like that is a spiritual death that I think is just terrible. You get that Ben Franklin quote where it's like some men lived to be like 75 but died at 25, and I feel like that's a really big problem, at least from my right-leaning ass about issues there. And I think that can be something that there's a lot of common sense agreement on, if you're ever going to create sort of this coalition of like low energy politics into something that's just like, hey, shit's fucked socially and economically. You got to balance them both. And that's where I'm like, and this is where like I see a lot of CRK's posts on Twitter where it's just like the right doesn't focus enough materially, or it focuses it in a really bad, like sort of like neoliberal take that's really bad. And then like the left doesn't focus enough on like the spiritual issues. And I'm like, this is where I'm like, man, motherfucker, don't miss.
Yeah, I think sometimes I might come across like I don't care about that spiritual decline. But I mean, hey, like I fucking like art, you know what I mean? That decline is reflected in the art.
100%.
You know what I mean? It's a spiritual death, and it's everywhere. It's just a malaise. Everybody feels it. Not people attribute it to different things, but everybody feels it. We're all feeling the same thing. But I think it's a consequence of the material thing. I just think about it in terms of like order of operations in my mind. It's like if you fix one thing, the other thing will come. But I mean that's yeah. But yeah, that's the way I think about it. Were you going to say something, Siwish?
No, I was just saying, I was Bonhis, while you were talking there, the Prudentialist, I was going to ask you what you thought a spiritual solution would look like. But I guess that's for your video that you're working on. I mean, so I'll leave that for...
You can leave it like a 2-minute teaser before we leave.
I mean, like...
It's the spoiler cast.
Yeah, there you go, right? For your patrons who pay for the second half, right? There's your teaser. To me, I think when you look at spiritual problems, I think we need to identify that one of the greater consequences of secularism, this, push that things are neutral, that things don't have the separation of church and state, like whatever happens, there's always going to be a governing ideology. You can call it a theocracy, you can call it a theology. There's always going to be some sort of teleological lens in which, government and whoever's in charge are going to view things. It's an epistemological problem. I think for the fact, and this is where there's a great video by the Distributors called To Be Like Right Wing in 9 Points. And one of the biggest things that he talks about, and one of those points, is the importance of, looking beyond your life, sort of this teleological hierarchy. And the fact is that we no longer care spiritually as a society. I think about, what we pass on. We've made childlessness such a prominent thing. We've made no-fault divorce a thing. We've made it to where we don't care about what happens afterwards. We only focus on the here and now. The time preference has been so pushed up that we don't think long term. And so this is where I find it very interesting, because you can see this problem very clearly on the left, where Noam Chomsky had that talk, I think, with like Sanders and that one other lady on that podcast, where he was talking about climate change. He's like, well, don't you not want your grandchildren to drown? And they responded very adamantly, like, no, our kids are being killed now, like we've got to focus on the now and not the long term. And to me, that's an issue. And then the right, of course, does it in this very normie boomer con take that irks the fuck out of me, because they're like, well, think about the debt crisis and think about what kind of like problem your children are going to inherit. And it's like, my children are probably going to be told in school that they're the devil because of the color of their skin. But okay, like that's what I need to focus on. Like, fuck off.
Think about some fake problem that's nothing.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not a fake problem. Like, but it's just an issue, but it's a bullshit issue, like compared to average Joe John Q normie, right? And so I think that for a spiritual solution, you sort of you need to, at the very least, whether it's from a Christian worldview, whatever you want to call it, I think that you can easily sort of try your best to reintroduce the importance of the long term. And I think that you can do it in a way that the left and the right can definitely agree on in some ways. I think the environment's a good one. I think that, we're talking about like deforestation, the microplastics, all the shit that affects all of us, I think is a way to do it. But at the same time, like you need to stop looking at children as a negative consequence. Yep. And I mean, that's partially a consequence of the sexual revolution. And we could definitely have a whole other conversation on that in some later episode. But like, you need to start viewing as children as a good thing. You need to start viewing all these maternal and paternal instincts as a good thing. And then once you do, holy shit, the world actually matters, because you've got this kid to raise. You've got these things that are important. You need to facilitate that sense of, I must become a guardian and ward, not only for my children, but for my community and my neighborhood, because this is what he or she is going to inherit.
Yeah. And stewardship.
It is. And that's gone, especially in the US. I think that the only times that we really have stewardship is either A, if you're really lucky to come of means and you're going to inherit something, or you're thinking about, your family or taking care of them or a home or whatever. Like, those are the only times that I really see stewardship. And to me, it's even more depressing that we don't have more multi-generational households. Like the Hispanics and the Chinese, right? They'll take care of their grandparents and whatever when they get too old or frail. They'll take care of their parents when they can. And to me, that's really admirable. And we used to do that in this society, and then all these things disappeared. And I think regardless of where you come from in your political socialization, I think that you can identify that there's this real spiritual emptiness and this malaise of kind of just this hedonistic nihilism that rules the country. And to me, that depresses me, because it's just like recently, like I have gone through this crazy year of kidney failure and getting a transplant. And since then, like I've really returned more to my Christian roots, and I'm leaning towards the Orthodox Church. But like, and so I have this awakening, and I sort of understand that like we are here on this earth. We have purpose. We are here in God's image. I know I'm getting a little preachy now, but like to wrap it up, it's just
go off. we don't have this that often. So
oh well, I mean, like we have this emptiness that has just sort of been gone for so many people. And to me, if you were ever to bring that back, and I really think that you can, even if it just means that I talk about this in a video where it's just like, listen, you're not going to change the world. You're not going to be the guy that's going to be Alexander the Great of the 21st century. Most likely you're not. If you are, congratulations, and I'll start listening to you. But until then, what you can do is start being more involved. If that means you go to a parent-teacher conference, or that means you go, to a local city hall meeting, or even you just talk to your HOA and you talk to your like neighborhood watch or whatever.
Living the life of your neighbors and the people
exactly,
in the community
getting involved with your neighbor, being an example to your neighbor. If you start doing that, you're going to make your community a better place. You're going to make your community a better place for your kids. And you're going to start understanding that a lot of that amplified crap that we talked about earlier in the show, you can probably get more people to agree with you to resist it. And that's where, like, we talk about localism. And like, for me, I've lived in cities all my life until right about a year and a half ago, where I moved in the middle of bumfuck nowhere in like a red part of Texas. And that's where a lot of this kind of like the reactionary in me sort of came out. And that's sort of what's been my political journey, because it's just like, these people care about their neighbors. They talk about their communities at church. Right. They talk about what's going on with their kids. And it's just like, these people actually give a fuck about what's going to happen long after they're gone. And it's just like, could you imagine if we instituted that on a nationwide level? If people started caring about what Chicago would look like for their kids long after they're dead, what New York would look like long after they're dead, what Los Angeles would look like environmentally, if they thought about their kids. Like, to me, that would definitely be a great way to both change the spiritual, but also the material problems in this world. So that would be my little teaser for the spiritual problems that exist in this country.
I think that's very, very well said. Made me feel like I want to go out and talk to some fucking people, my neighbors and shit. I think
you should.
The only problem,
we live in a low trust society. It sucks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially with COVID. Yep.
I think the only problem is that, like, I don't know. I think a lot of this, like, I don't think you can just like will a lot of that into existence again. I think capital's come in. I think it's hollowed us out and it's commodified so much of just being a human being. And I think that we need to fight back and decommodify that stuff. Like we need to be able to like take down the profit incentive to be able to put your grandma into a nursing home instead of taking care of her with your family like you fucking should, or take away, the jobs that keep you away from your family for, if you're working 2 40-hour jobs a week making minimum wage so that you can just put food on the table, and you're leaving them to fall into the cracks of being raised entirely by their school teachers or being raised entirely by daycare workers or whatever that have also profit incentive, either just personally or as a class to do so. It's there. I think we have to be able to have a 2-pronged attack on it, with material answers for it as a way to foster that spiritual renaissance. But at the same time, you got to get enough people on the same page to push for that in the first place. And a lot of the way that you can do that is by bringing people together, being active in your community to do so. So it's like it's a 2-pronged approach there. I think that trying to stress one too much over the other.
No, I agree with you that you need a balance. And maybe this is where we'll disagree maybe on like the political stance on it all. Like for me, I think that a lot of the hyper individualization and the atomization, capital is a problem with that. But I think what really spurs it on is a lot of the Enlightenment ideals that come from the tenets of liberalism. That's where you sort of get the neo-reactionary approach. It's like that's where you see a lot of the causes, because it's just like there's no such thing as this neutral institution. We know that. We've seen that, obviously. There's no equal treatment under the law. There's no, you've got to focus on whoever's in power will most likely exploit you. And despite the fact that you're supposed to have recourse, it doesn't exist. So what happens is that we have a system, particularly like liberal democracy in the United States, where like power is so diffused that we've gotten, companies like Amazon so fucking powerful that we've got these booths where people are supposed to be happy for 10 minutes while they're working in their wish fulfillment centers, which I really think is just going to turn into that Futurama thing of a suicide booth. Yep. Like this is where I'll agree with the materialist lens, and this is where I agree with like a lot of like more like left-leaning people, where it's like, like no sane country would let Amazon or Google or any of these companies be that fucking powerful. Like they would be like Jeff Bezos would have been hung a long time ago. And
in Minecraft.
In Minecraft,
but
of
these
course,
like liberalism
I want to happen in Minecraft
with the Ender Dragon.
This like government structural and organization and like liberalism as an operating methodology, though, is a vehicle for capital, and for capital accumulation. And that's why it exists in the first place. And that's why it's ripping apart everything that you love.
I think this is where that distinction is. It's really interesting, that nuance, but it's like the idea of is capital using liberalism as the means, this is the medium to do this, to hollow things out, or is the liberalism using capitalism as the medium? I think that's where it's kind of,
no, I agree with you though. That's where it's really interesting, because that's where you'll see people like some of the national populist conservative types kind of talk about more increased regulation. But this is where you'll hear like Aaron and I sort of like quasi fed post on Twitter where it's just like, we'll take out that GK Chesterton quote where it's like, it's a shame that not enough politicians are hung these days in Minecraft, or that, no sane country would allow Amazon to have that much power. It would have been nationalized a long time ago. Like you'll find like a lot of us, like from the neo-reactionary side, right, there's this sort of like libertarian to NRX pipeline, and so like we kind of have a lot of adherence for like the libertarian side of economics. Like I think it's important to improve productivity, but the thing that makes it more right-wing for us is that like you cannot worship capital. That's the biggest problem that the right has made. And this is where I'll agree with Apex, that both the left and the right are these battered wives of capitalism. And to me, the way that you do it, and I put a video out about This Is Not the Hill to Die On, where I was just sort of bitching about the whole Brandy Love thing, the whole porn star at the TP USA conference. But the one I put out these 3 principles. Like if the right ever wants to survive, it cannot worship line go up politics. You got to stop doing it. To quote my favorite boomer of all time, the guy from Swindon, Sargon, fuck the GDP. I don't think that matters as much. I really don't think it does. And this is why I find people like Matt Iglesias to be so fucking insufferable, because they're like, oh, well, in the United States, we've got, like ice making machines and air conditioners. And it's like, yeah, but no one has $500 to cover a flat tire in the United States, whereas you do in fucking Hungary. Like, oh my God, like you don't fucking get it. He's like, but I've got my breakfast tacos. And it's like, you're viewing immigration through the lens of like food trucks and like cultural centers. Like, this is disgusting and dehumanizing. Like, and to me, this is where I definitely agree with a lot of people on the left. Like, you can't just have a singular viewpoint. It can't be all material and it can't be all spiritual. You need both.
Yeah, I think
dialectic.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's one of the most white-pilling things recently is seeing like the right sort of leave the free market libertarian thing and like, incorporate the material thing. That's definitely the one thing I feel very hopeful about, or is very like encouraging.
I think it's because the right realized that like 60 years of the fusionist approach fucked us.
Right, exactly. But regarding like the spiritual thing, like, I mean, it's something that it's sad that you can't really talk about it, because people view it as like it's like it's like corny or to be genuine about it or bring it up. You know what I mean? It's like, like people have that attitude about it of like, oh, but this is really what it is. They want people to be like hollowed out husks where it's like, oh, the world's going to be flooded by the time I have a kid anyway. So what's the point? And, I might as well just indulge in all my...
Oh, they do that with climate change all the time. They're like, have less kids, don't have children. They're terrible for the environment.
Yeah. And if you believe that, if you really believe like, oh yeah, the world's going to be gone by then anyways, what's the point? Like, my kids are going to be racist because
you feel like there'd be more left-wing school shooters then.
yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think what they want is like, they want. And, if you've been in this mindset, you understand it. It's like when you get very like hedonistic and like, nihilistic and all that, like it's you're the perfect consumer because all these little like bugman like features that they give you, that's the only thing that really fills you. And like you're an addict. You're more of an addict for it and you need it more because what else is there? And you've already kind of resigned everything else. So it's important to talk about. And I feel like people are scared to talk about it because it's, they don't want to seem genuine about it, but it's important.
Not to mention also like the cover that provides for capital beyond like making you the perfect consumer to further reify it. You're also like, it creates this entire like, it unroots you from your history. It unroots you from your physical reality. And then it unroots you from any type of collective shared vision for the future. So what you are is you're left there just completely floating there. And they can just say, oh, actually down is up now. And the history, the past was actually this. And there is no future, but you can make it this by doing something that's absolutely not going to do that ever.
Yeah, exactly.
And so what they can do is they can keep doing that by keeping you like a fucking like deer in the headlights. Like you're overrun on fear. You're worried. You're confused because you don't know how you got there.
Right.
You're stuck in liberalism where you can't see history and events around you as connected and all coming through in one continuous motion. But instead you see everything as just an individual act that has nothing to do with what came before it, nothing to do with what's going to come after it, and just some random shit that just happened to you just because. And so when they do that, no one has any ability to actually point the fingers at, well, these are the people that are actually doing these things. And they did this one thing 4 years ago, and then it led to this thing like 3 years ago, and then this thing last year, which is now where we're at here today. Because they keep you just completely unmoored from all that. And while you're doing that, you're also consuming all your products. You're also, buying the new green products that they've created out of fucking nowhere. You're buying all these new things, and you're becoming the market actor they want you to be, while you're also just like obliviously letting them continue to do everything.
Oh, I know. And the worst part about it all, right, is that it's so easy to memory hole things. Like, how many people can really who can tell you what happened in like 2009, right? Like, who has that kind of memory?
It's the deluge.
The deluge, and it's just we're going to throw as much crap at you. And I think a lot of that this is where like the good old Uncle Ted's Cabin comes out, where you should the internet's kind of been a disaster for like the human like attention span, and it's been very easy to atomize people because we've created these machines that allow you to act like a fucking Skinner box about like, ooh, this one's a banger, like 3 likes, let's go. And it prevents you from really engaging in collective action, which is like, but that's also like the curse, right, of trying to make a brand for yourself and like in sort of like the commentary world, because you have to put out bangers. And this is where like I'm in a group chat with like Arn, and I know that he'll probably hear this one day because for some reason where he's just going to hear me like bitch about how jealous I get. He's like, look who's following me. And it's like, that's nice, dude, but please shut the fuck up. I don't need to see that today. I don't need my black pill. But that's how we are, right? Like we get this sort of self-commodification. We become way hedonistic. We buy into the things that just were totally contradictory 5 minutes ago. We've always been at war with East Asia, not Oceania. That's how it operates. And it's just an absolute mess. And I think that we've gotten to a point in this liberal society where we have become so hyper, individualized that anyone can exploit us for either capital or social reasons or spiritual reasons.
Absolutely.
And that's why you have like these really weird racial commissars and like HR departments, or that you've got, mandatory vaccinations coming out of like the private sector, quote unquote, because I don't think there's a distinction between public and private anymore. That's fucking gone. But I mean, on top of it all, right, like is that we've evolved from like the risk principle from Locke the harm principle from Locke, and it's essentially a society should operate in case of the likelihood that something will harm them, right? So like that's why we have traffic laws. That's why we have like red lights and stop signs and seat belts. But it's evolved to a point now where we're seeing the logical conclusion of that, where it's risk of being offended, the risk of grandma, risk of grandma being killed, despite the fact that you're like fucking 50 miles away from grandma. And so we've evolved to a point in this sort of like we've taken liberalism to its logical conclusion, or at least it's like a logical extreme, where it's like, okay, we've become so sort of padded down, so hyper individualized. There's no way to really form a society that's going to collectively operate. It becomes very hard to have that, problem of creating a national identity like we talked about earlier. So it's an interesting divide where we see things either, is it capital? Is it, the liberalism? Which one is exploiting which? It's a very interesting chicken or the egg question. I would love to revisit it in the future.
Yeah, that's the thing when I talk to more NRX people or right people, I realize that is it's a subtle nuance, and you could almost argue it doesn't matter, but I think it kind of matters, but either way. But yeah, it's something I really enjoy.
They both definitely take advantage of each other. I think the fun experiment, right, in some future fantasy world where we could do this would be like, okay, one side takes away liberalism, one side takes away capitalism, and let's see which one's the root cause. That would be a fun experiment. I don't think you'll ever get that, but I mean,
no, it's definitely a feedback loop.
Definitely. They both play off of each other.
Yeah.
Liberalism is just I don't know. It's an evolution. So I don't think that there's a take away liberalism.
All right. Well, let's not go into. We'll save this for the next time we got Prudentialist on, because SLAV hopping. I gotta hop off too. But thanks for coming on, man.
I was really looking forward to it when you invited me. This was great.
Yeah. I think.